Hello, I hope you're well. Welcome or welcome back to my channel, and welcome to today's video, which is filled with tea. This is the video where I talk about my 10 most disappointing reads of 2021. Some of these are the books that I gave the lowest reviews to this year, but some of them are just the books that I had the highest expectations for, and they just kind of fell flat for me and just left me feeling empty. As dramatic as that sounds. So right off the bat, I'm gonna say that several of these titles are going to be controversial because they are quite popular books, and I was disappointed. As I said, they were not for me, and if they are favorite books of yours, like, I am so happy for you. They just weren't to my taste, but that doesn't mean that you can't appreciate them. I'm just gonna put that blanket statement there. Like, I love that you love them. I'm just saying that. But the first book that I'm gonna talk about is one that, honestly, if you are a subscriber to my channel, you'll probably know it's coming. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Now, this wasn't a book that was really on my radar, but my friend Liz, who I love, sent me her extra copy that she had, and so I decided to read it at the beginning of 2021. Like, I honestly can't believe that it was nearly a year ago now, but I struggled with this book. And to be honest, there were many times when I wanted to DNF it. I was just like, oh shoot, this does not bode well for my 2021 reading life. Like, to start off the year with a book that you want to DNF, just like, this is a bad omen. Like, this is gonna end badly. But I just really did not get the hype around this book. And when I read it, I feel like all of the reviews on it had been glowing. There are some reviews now, I think Cindy and also Noel, both have really interesting videos on it. But for me, there was a lot. Essentially, if you don't know what this book is about, it is about Addie LaRue, who makes this Faustian bargain with the devil that kind of gives her, like, immortality. So she's living forever. She's been living for hundreds of years at this point. But the catch is that she can live all this time, but no one remembers her. She can't, like, leave a mark, effectively. So the moment she walks out of the room, the people she's interacted with forget her. And then one day, one person remembers her. And you know what? Faustian bargains aren't original.
Florals for spring. Groundbreaking.
They've been around forever, and so I just felt like it was kind of something that's already been done, but also I just felt like the book was like 150 pages too long. I didn't really think that any of the characters were particularly interesting, except for, what was his name? Was it Luke? The devil? Is that his name? Hold on. Yes, his name is Luke. Like, he was the most interesting character, and he's the devil, but it just kind of dragged for me. Like, I thought the writing was mediocre. As I said, I didn't think it was an overly original idea. And then the fact that, like, some of this is, like, is set in the past, like, it really irked me as a historical fiction reader that so little attention was paid to world building in these, like, past settings that Addie LaRue lives through. Like, none whatsoever. It was like V.E. Schwab didn't even try to make you feel like you were in the past at any point. So for me, it wasn't a book that was on my radar. It wasn't a book I would have necessarily picked up on my own. And so it just kind of was meh. Like, I don't know what else to say, but those are my thoughts on that one. Next, we have Exit West by Mohsin Hamid, which again was another book that Liz recommended to me. Actually, at one point, like right at the beginning of this channel, I basically gave her carte blanche with some money and said, pick me out some books, and this happened to be one of them and is one that she really loves. And all I could say, no offense, Liz, was thank God this book was a short one. I listened to it as an audiobook. I think it was maybe 4 or 5 hours long, but it was definitely one of these books that I felt as if, like, putting it down would have meant it was an automatic DNF, because I don't know if I could have, like, convinced myself to give it another try. I was nervous about it when I saw this was a book that she picked out for me because it is speculative fiction. It is set during these, like, a civil war of some sort, or it's about to break out in Middle Eastern countries. They're not identified, but there's a romance happening between these two characters. As the civil war is about to happen and there's all this unrest and chaos, there are like these doors that you can like step through and they will take you elsewhere. You know, speculative fiction and I don't get on, and the like door thing was, I think, just a little bit too much for me. But I also just never felt particularly grounded in this book. I didn't feel any sort of connection with the characters or the world that they were living in. It all felt a little bit distant to me, and I didn't love it. I wanted to again because this was a book that my dear friend had recommended to me, but this was just a case of me not really connecting with the characters, the world, or even the writing style. So this was unfortunate. The next book is Hijab Red Lipstick by Yousra Imran, which again wasn't a book that I would have necessarily picked for myself, but my work book club chose this book. And it's YA, I believe. That tells you how much of an impression it left on me. But it is this story about a British Muslim girl who ends up moving from the UK to the Gulf with her father, who was already pretty kind of strict with her in the UK, but under the influence of his peers in the Gulf, he ends up becoming increasingly more conservative. And so it's the story of her really trying to live what she considers a normal teenage life under this like guardianship system. And to be honest, this was a book that had so much potential, because I do think that exploring what this guardianship system means to young women living under it would have been really interesting. But overall, I felt like the book just fixated on this one facet of it, which is how it impacts like women's interaction with men and like dating. And it just felt like the main character was obsessed with dating and like these 3 different men that I believe she tries to see over the course of the book, and like makeup. And that felt like literally the crux of the book. But I feel like the main issue I had here was that the characters were just flat. Like, if a character like her father was meant to be kind of the antagonist, this, like, force against which she was fighting, he just was painted with this really broad stroke that made him seem evil and a villain. There was no nuance to him, and it was similar with the characters that were, like, the heroes or heroines. They were just good, and there was little complexity to them, and that really bothered me. It also really bothered me that the book had 2 characters that were both sexually assaulted, and the book is not long, like, by any means. So these were the things that stuck out to me. I mean, truth be told, like, YA books aren't generally my bag. I didn't like being a teenager. Teenage me would have been obnoxious, but like the fixation on like dating and makeup and that sort of stuff just feels really superficial to me in this format. So not great. Not great at all. Now we're going to talk about another book that is popular. And this is on this list because I really had high hopes for this book. It's Pachenko by Min Jin Lee, which I talked about in a recent tag video, but this is like my genre, historical fiction, and I've heard so many rave reviews about this book that I honestly, picking it up, I thought this was like a certain 5-star. Like, there was absolutely nothing that could make this book less than a 5-star for me. And it wasn't that the writing was bad, like, far from it. I think the prose is actually quite beautiful, like the wordsmithing, for lack of a better term there, was quite striking. But overall, I didn't like the pacing of the book. I felt really distant from the characters. And from what I remember, like, for this book that has this beautiful language in it, the, like, discussions of, like, sex were just randomly really, like, in your face and blunt and direct, and just felt completely, like, disjointed from the rest of the story. The overall concept of this book was really interesting to me. It starts like in the early 1900s, and it first starts out in Korea when it's occupied by the Japanese, but the characters eventually end up in Japan, and it talks a lot about the sort of racial discrimination against the Koreans by the Japanese, and it's like a family saga that encompasses several generations, and it just has relationships between these different generations, which all should be great for me. And it wasn't that it was awful, like, just putting that out there. It just didn't have the sort of, like, impact on me that I had anticipated, so it wasn't quite the reading experience that I had hoped for in the end. And moving on to another historical fiction, we have The Lady Elizabeth by Alison Weir. Now, again, this was a book that I picked up and had, like, the best hopes for, because Alison Weir, as, like, a historical fiction writer, especially with the Tudor time period, is kind of up there with Philippa Gregory and even, like, Jean Plady, although I think she's a little bit less well-known. But, like, Alison Weir is up there, and I remember reading one of her nonfiction books years and years ago, like, when I was still in high school, and I really enjoyed it. So when I picked this up, I was really looking forward to something that was going to be really, really well researched by someone who knows the time period, and those are the types of historical fictions I really enjoy. Like, I want to feel completely and totally immersed in the time period, and Elizabeth I is, like, one of my historical girl crushes. I find her absolutely fascinating. So this is a novel that is focused on young Elizabeth, basically from her birth or thereabouts to the time that she is about to ascend to the throne. So it covers her childhood, it addresses, like, the execution of her mother, her many stepmothers, her relationship with Henry VIII, her relationship with her sister Queen Mary, and just all that stuff. And you know what? The writing wasn't bad. Like, I don't think Alison Weir is a bad writer, but the voice of the character of Elizabeth bugged me, because I know that historically Elizabeth was meant to be a very precocious child. Yeah, but she was still a child, and the voice of the character here just didn't feel anything like a child, and it bothered me. There's precocious, and then there was whatever this was, and no, it wasn't great. But I think beyond that, there was a choice made in this story, which I can't say much about because I would spoil the plot, but there was a choice, and it is like a plot device, a trope that comes up pretty frequently in like a certain type of historical fiction, and I just didn't like it. I didn't like it for this storyline. I didn't like it for this character. And yes, I know artistic license is gonna be taken. I anticipate that. Like, these authors aren't writing biographies, they are writing novels, and so they do things to make the plots move forward and to make it interesting for the readers. But this one, I could have done without. I don't think it was necessary. So I just had strong feelings about this one. Next, we have Cocaine Blues by Carrie Greenwood, and this is book 1 in the Phryne Fisher series. And the reason why this was disappointing for me was because I love the TV series. It is an Australian TV series. I have probably seen all 3 seasons of it a half dozen times. It's one of those comfort shows for me. I thought the little movie they did was absolutely adorable. I love Essie Davis. Like, Phryne Fisher as a character is my girl. However, this is one of these rare instances where the TV show was better than the book. And it's not even a long book, but it was just kind of meh. Like, Phryne is such a vivacious character, and I don't feel like the book necessarily did her justice, like, at all. So Phryne is this flapper detective who loves clothes and fast cars and has lots of lovers and lives that, like, flapper, eccentric lifestyle while also solving crimes. And she kind of has this found family of individuals that she involves in her investigations, and it's fun, but I feel like the book itself just kind of, as I said, falls flat. Like, there's a lot of focus on describing her clothes, which is distracting. I feel like a lot of the language that was used by the characters felt oddly dated, which is weird because, I mean, it's not something I usually notice or that necessarily bothers me in historical fiction when they use, like, the slang or the language that was, like, common at the time. But this just felt like it was laid on very, very thick. It's a very short book, and there were subplots which just none of it felt completely fully formed. And I mean, the thing is like, I've seen the TV episode that's based on this book, and I really enjoy that episode. But yeah, I think because I went into this with so much love and adoration for the TV show that there was honestly nothing that this book could have done to live up to it. But honestly, like, because of just how mediocre this first book was, I don't think I'm going to attempt to read any other books in this series. I wouldn't say never, but it's definitely kind of ended up more towards the bottom of the TBR as far as books go. I just think that I would much rather watch the TV show again than read the book. The next book, I don't even know how I'm going to talk about this book because I was so lost the majority of the time that I was reading it. We're talking about The Luminaries by Eleanor Caton, which I read as a buddy read with Margaret from over at Margaret Pinard. And this was a book that I've had on my TBR forever. It's a really chunky book. It is definitely a tome. I was a little intimidated because I knew it was going to skew very, very literary, and it was a big literary fiction. Well, this book took me forever to read. I want to say it was the better part of a month, which is a long time for me. And it just hurt my head. It just hurt my head so much. It's set during like the gold rush in New Zealand in the 1860s, which was a setting that was really interesting to me because I hadn't really read much literature set in New Zealand. I definitely hadn't heard of the gold rush there. I think as an American, the gold rush that we learn about is the one in California and out west. And so there was a lot there that I was intrigued by, and the idea is that this young man goes to like this town during the gold rush, and there's this massive cast of characters. It's predominantly male. Like, there's a man who is murdered, there's a prostitute who tries to commit suicide, this like drunk man dies, and a fortune is discovered in his house, and it's like all the different pieces from these different characters' perspectives, all who have connections to like zodiac signs and astrology, like throughout the book, basically trying to unfurl different aspects of the mysteries in this story. And there was nothing about this book that was easy. I don't think the writing style is particularly accessible, even if it is quite striking. There are a lot of characters to keep track of, a lot of them. The like astrological stuff, I felt like completely went over my head. Like, I feel like you have to really be into astrology or spend a lot of time trying to decode it for that aspect or puzzle piece to like fall into place. And I don't mind books that make you work to really appreciate them, but I feel like overall I worked a lot and the payoff wasn't great. Like, if I work that hard for a book, I really want it to be like 5 stars, a book that I'm obsessed with. I just felt like the payoff here was not great. But honestly, like, I could not wait to unhaul that book and have it out of my life. Like, I was over it. It took up enough space. And now that I've talked about it again here, I honestly never want to talk about it again. So, we're going to move on. Next, we have Liberty by Caitlin Greenidge. And this ended up on this list because it was a most anticipated release for me. I was so hyped about this book when I first heard about it. And it just ended up not being what I expected it to be. It is about this young black girl living in the Reconstruction era in Brooklyn. Her mother is a doctor and wants her to follow in her footsteps, but Liberty kind of has other ideas, and it's a coming of age story. And when this Haitian man ends up asking her to like marry him and move to Haiti, she takes him up on the opportunity, and life in Haiti isn't all it's cracked up to be. And, you know, again, this was a book that wasn't awful, but it was just mediocre to me. And from what I remember, because honestly, it was one of these books that it really didn't leave much an impression on me is that I went into it thinking that it was going to focus a lot more on, like, moving to Haiti, and you spend a lot of time kind of with younger Liberty before any of this other stuff really comes into play. And then, like, it takes 2/3 of the books for her to be in Haiti. And then it all kind of wraps up really, really quickly, and in this way that just wasn't satisfying. So I did feel like the pacing was a little off, and I feel like the synopsis just overall didn't do a great job at explaining what you were getting when you picked up this book. So it was, again, just an okay book. And you know what? It's one of these books that I feel like I am in the minority here, because I've actually seen it on quite a few lists for historical fiction as being one of the best historical fiction books of 2021. And for me, it was really just okay. The next book was historical romance, and it was Mr. Malcolm's List by Suzanne Elaine. And I actually had a whole reading vlog where I was just reading historical romance, and this was one of the books. And I think I described this as not being offensive in any way, but it was like a low 3-star for me on Goodreads. If I had been in the story graph at the time, it probably would have been like a 2.75 or something. It was just a book that the idea of it was really cute. It's kind of like a Regency historical romance, and like there's some like Pride and Prejudice vibes. Essentially, the love interest, the male protagonist, he has a list of traits of women that he's looking for as far as like requirements for a wife. And word gets around about this list, and one of the women he spurns because she doesn't meet his qualifications decides to come up with this whole plan to seek revenge. And she involves Selena, I believe her name is, and Selena and what's his name? What is his name? Hold on. Jeremy Malcolm. Brittany, it's in the title. Mr. Malcolm himself. And Selena and Mr. Malcolm kind of have chemistry from the beginning. Like, they like each other. And the idea is that Selena is going to basically win him over, woo him, and then say, you know what? You don't meet the requirements on my list. You know? But overall, the characters weren't super developed. I didn't necessarily believe in the romance itself, and upsetting to me at the time was that there was like little to no steam in this book. Like, if you want smut, if you want any sort of like action, this is not a book for you. It is pretty chaste. If I remember rightly, like, they kiss, they make out, and that's kind of the extent of it for the course of the book. And I'm someone who's new to the romance genre overall when it comes to just kind of straight romances. But of the romances I read this year, this was the one that was really kind of the most meh. Like, it was really just fluffy. Like, it was cute. I read it really quickly. It was bingeable, I would say, but like, I would have liked more. It kind of was very hollow. Like, if I had to describe it, it is like those Easter eggs that are massive, and you expect there to be something in it, a filling, more candy, but you take a chunk out of it and it's literally just air. It is literally just a shell. Like, it's unsatisfying. And that's how I felt with this book. And the last book is Velvet with the Night by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which again was not necessarily a book I would have picked for myself. This was another work book club pick. And honestly, I'd heard so much about Mexican Gothic, but because of all the hype around it, I hadn't been drawn to it. I probably would not have been drawn to this one either. And, you know, it really did nothing for me. Again, it wasn't a book that was necessarily offensive. It was just kind of forgettable. Like, this is the book on this list that I read most recently, and a lot of what happened in the plot and the story has already been dumped out of my brain somewhere else. Like, it really didn't leave much of an impression. So it's set in the 1970s in Mexico City, and it's revolving around kind of the civil unrest and kind of this revolutionary sect of individuals kind of within the student population. And one of these individuals goes missing, and it's the story of her neighbor who lives for like her romance comics or stories, and this like eccentric enforcer named Elvis who is obsessed with Elvis music, and they're two of a kind, let me tell you. But my problem with it was that overall the characters felt really, really cartoonish to me. Like, they felt like caricatures of themselves, and because of that they didn't feel very three-dimensional. For me too, like, the writing style was just okay. Like, there was nothing great about it. It was fine, but because of the following that Silvia Moreno Garcia has, I was expecting something quite a bit different. And I also feel that, like, as far as like a mystery or thriller goes, trying to find Leonora, who has gone missing, I feel like it was predictable. I'm not even someone who reads those types of books on the regular. Like, mystery and thriller don't normally do it for me. I could probably count on one hand the number of books in those genres that I have read. But I could still see where it was going. I kind of knew it well ahead of like the big reveal. And so, yeah, I wasn't overall impressed by it. That was how I felt about that one. As I said, there has been quite a bit of tea spilled in this video because these are the books that were like most disappointing to me, as I said at the top of the video. These were books that in some cases left really strong impressions on me because of how much I didn't enjoy the reading experience, or they were disappointing because of just how like forgettable they ended up being. They kind of fall into those two categories. I think the lowest rating that I gave all year was probably 2 stars, and I think a few of the ones that I talked about here were those. It's just like, in some cases the books just weren't for me, and that's fine. In other cases I went into them with such high expectations that they were probably destined to fail me. But anyway, that's where I stand for 2021. But I am really curious to know what your 3 most disappointing reads of 2021 were. So be sure to leave that information in the comment section of this video. I am really, really curious. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that no one's canceling me because I disliked one of their favorite books. And I do hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe, because all those things help this little channel grow and they mean the world to me. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!